But not shameless. He was cast out for birthing a child out of wedlock, until a Comanche warrior wrapped them in his cloak and never let go. The wooden shutters slammed against the wall as Reverend Elias Moore stormed into the room. His boots thudded across the floorboards, echoing like judgment in the silence. Abigail stood trembling by the hearth, a bundle clutched in her arms, her newborn son, still red from birth and swaddled in her old linen shawl. "You shame me," Elias spat. "You shame this house, this town, this church, and you dare bring that bastard into my sight." "Father," Abigail whispered, tears thick in her throat, "please. He's my son. He did nothing wrong. He is sin made flesh." Elias's voice was a blade. "You think your weeping excuses fornication? That crying wipes clean your whoredom?" "I was forced," she cried. "You know it. Sheriff Wilkins came when no one else was home. I begged—" "You begged?" Elias barked a laugh. "A righteous woman would have fought, would have screamed loud enough to rattle the walls of heaven." Across the room, her mother, Ruth, stood pressed against the wall, hands trembling, lips pale. She hadn't spoken once. Elias had forbidden it. Abigail fell to her knees. The baby whimpered, and she held him tighter. "Please, let him be baptized. Let him have a name." "Has no father. He is a stain." Elias leaned down, his breath like winter. "You will leave this house at dawn. Take the child. Take your shame. But you do not take our name." No one spoke of the nights that followed. The stones thrown at her sewing shop. The children chanting "unclean" in the streets. Her food rations were cut. Neighbors turned their backs. One night, a bottle crashed through her window with a scrap of scripture tied to its neck. "Suffer not a witch to live." 3 nights later, the shop caught fire. At dawn, Abigail stood at the threshold of her family home, the baby bundled in her arms. Her face was pale but dry. The front door closed behind her without a word. Her belongings had been taken. All that remained was the shawl, a tin water cup, and the weight of a world that never forgave women for surviving. She had taken only 2 steps when the door creaked behind her. "Abby," her mother's whisper. Ruth Moore ran toward her, clutching a small wicker basket wrapped in cloth. "There's bread," she said quickly, voice shaking, "and lard, and a tin of healing salve." Abigail froze. "Mother—" "I couldn't say anything," Ruth whispered. He said if I did." Just then a roar came from the porch. Elias. "Ruth!" he bellowed. "What are you doing?" Ruth stepped in front of Abigail. "I was only—" The basket was ripped from her hands. Elias flung it to the ground, bread scattering in the dust. He struck Ruth across the face with the back of his hand. She fell hard, lips bloodied, and he grabbed her by the hair, dragging her toward the door. "Take your filth and go," he shouted to Abigail, "and no, you are no daughter of mine." Abigail stood frozen, the baby crying softly against her breast. She looked down at the smashed bread, at the healing salve now buried in dirt. She saw her mother's eyes, red with pain, pleading. Ruth was pulled back into the house, the door slammed, and the sound of a belt snapping filled the air like gunfire. Abigail did not scream. She adjusted her son in her arms. Then she walked, past the basket, past the porch, past the memories. She did not look back until the house was far enough that her father's voice could no longer be heard, but close enough that she could still see the smoke from the chimney curling into the morning sky. She whispered to her child, "You will never know this place, and I will never let it know you." And then she kept walking, the dust of the road mixing with her tears, her feet unsteady but forward-bound. She had been cast out, but she still carried a name no one could take. Mother. The woods were cruel at night. Abigail staggered between gnarled trees, the infant pressed tight to her chest. Her arms ached, her legs trembled. Her dress, already threadbare, clung to her with sweat and cold. Leaves crackled beneath her bare feet. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Another answered. She flinched and spun, eyes darting. The child whimpered. Her heart pounded like a war drum. She needed water, food, shelter, anything. She had followed no path, just the vague instinct to stay hidden, away from roads, away from people. But the forest was darker than she had imagined. Its shadows felt alive. Her foot caught a root. She pitched forward and scrambled to her knees, clutching the baby. He cried out, sharp and sudden. Abigail pressed his head to her shoulder, rocking him desperately. Shh, shh, it's all right, it's all right. But it was not. Nothing was. Her lips were dry. Her breath came in gasps. She saw a thick-limbed pine tree with low branches. Maybe if she could climb, rest high up until morning. She hoisted herself up. One hand found bark, the other held her son. She used her knees to balance. Just a little higher. The bark slipped beneath her fingers. She fell. The world flipped. The baby screamed. Her back struck earth. Her head cracked against a stone. The stars above swirled, fractured. Her vision narrowed to a slit. Pain seared her skull. The baby was still crying, but farther now. Was she losing him? Losing herself? She slipped into black. Then light. Not bright, not holy. A flicker of orange, firelight. A figure stood some yards away, cloaked in shadow and smoke. A man, tall and still, a knife strapped at his side, bow slung over his shoulder. His hair was long, raven black, and his eyes reflected the fire like an animal's. Kaza. He had been hunting alone, tracking elk, when he heard it. A baby's cry, shrill and wrong against the whisper of wind. At first he thought it a trick. White men had used such tactics before, but curiosity tugged harder than fear. He approached the grove where the sound came from. What he found stopped him cold. A woman, pale-skinned, blood crusted on her temple, her body curled protectively around a child, barely days old, swaddled in rags. They were huddled at the base of a tree like fallen leaves. He crouched, his hand near his knife. He waited. Nothing moved but the rise and fall of the infant's breath. This was no trap. But still, why here? Why alone? Taza studied the woman. Her arms were bruised, one foot scraped raw. The baby's cheek was red with cold, yet even unconscious, she held him tight. Taza's jaw tightened. He could walk away, no one would ever know. The white people called his kind thieves, savages, shadows. If he brought her back, they would say he stole her. But the child's cry pierced something deeper. He sighed. With slow, careful movements, he reached into his pack and pulled out his cloak, a heavy thing stitched with years of wear and the fur of the first bison he had ever felled. He wrapped it around both mother and child. "Easy now," he muttered, not to them, but to the night itself. He checked her legs. One ankle was twisted, the skin raw from walking too far in shoes not meant for wilderness. Her hair stuck to her neck with sweat. He slid his knife from its sheath and cut a piece of leather from his own wrist binding. Gently, he used it to tie a splint of bark to her ankle. Then he picked her up. She moaned softly but did not wake. The baby stirred. Taza adjusted his grip, tucking the bundle closer to his chest. He whistled once. His horse emerged from the trees, silent and waiting. He lifted her into the saddle, careful not to jostle the child. Then, before he mounted, he knelt by a patch of bare earth. From his satchel he pulled a small twig, forked, smooth, and tied a black feather to it with a strip of sinew. He planted it upright in the soil, whispering something in his language. "Here is a sign, a gesture to the Earth Mother. I bring life not of my blood. I ask your permission to shelter them." Only then did he mount the horse and turn toward the hidden path that led to his shelter, deep in the folds of stone where the wind did not bite and the night did not reach. He did not know her name, but he would not let her die. Not tonight. Abigail awoke to the rustling hush of pine needles and the scent of wood smoke. Her eyelids fluttered open. The world was dim, soft, unfamiliar. She lay on a pallet of animal hides beneath a roof of bound branches and stretched rawhide. The walls of the shelter curved around her like a hollowed nest. It was warm, almost tender. Her heart jerked. Where was she? Then, soft breath close by. She turned and saw him, her son, curled beneath a stitched buffalo hide, cheeks flushed from sleep. He stirred, yawned, and nestled closer. Memory slammed back like a door in the wind. Dark woods, the fall, firelight, a figure, and then nothing. She sat up too fast. Pain lanced through her ankle, bandaged and braced with bark. She winced. Suddenly, the shelter's opening darkened. A figure stepped inside. Abigail's breath caught. The man from the forest. The one who had found her. He was taller in the light, wide-shouldered with a quiet gravity. His black hair was braided with red beads. A bone knife hung at his side, but he made no move toward it. He knelt without speaking and placed a bowl of water near her. Then, with the same care, set down a bundle of fresh berries, dried meat, and something wrapped in leaves. Medicinal, perhaps. She stared, stunned. I don't understand," she whispered. But he said nothing, not even a nod. When he looked into her eyes, it was not with hunger or threat, but with something closer to stillness. Recognition, maybe. A mirror, not a knife. And then he stood and turned, ducking back out of the shelter without a word. Abigail scrambled for a stick lying nearby, gripping it like a weapon. Her son whimpered. She hushed him and crawled to the shelter's entrance. Through the cracks in the wall, she saw the man tending a fire outside, preparing what looked like a poultice over hot stones. She did not wait. Gathering her son, she slipped out through the back of the shelter, stumbling into the cold air. The woods loomed again, and fear twisted her gut. She hobbled as fast as she could into the brush, her ankle throbbing. She made it perhaps 100 yards before her foot caught in a root. She fell hard, clutching the baby close. Branches cracked nearby. She froze. He was there, not running, not angry. He simply stood, watching her, waiting. Abigail pushed herself up, shaking, and hissed, "Don't touch us." But he never moved. After a long pause, he knelt, picked up the berry pouch she had dropped, and placed it gently on a rock beside her. Then he turned and walked away, back toward the shelter, his back exposed. Unthreatening. He was giving her a choice. That night she stayed, not in the shelter, but curled at the tree line, too afraid to sleep, too tired to keep watch. The baby cried softly. She had no milk left. Her skin felt hot, her tongue dry. Near midnight, she stumbled toward the stream she had glimpsed earlier, hoping to soothe the fever spiking in her head. She never saw the snake. Its strike was silent. Pain bloomed sharp in her calf, burning like fire under skin. She screamed, and then he was there. "Taza." He dropped to her side, tore the cloth from her leg, found the wound. Without hesitation, he pressed his mouth to the bite and drew the poison. He spat blood into the grass, again and again, working swiftly. Then he crushed the same herbs she had seen earlier and packed them into the wound. Abigail sobbed, half from pain, half from disbelief. He lifted her in his arms, took her back to the shelter. She was barely conscious. He placed her down gently, covered her, then took the child and held him close against his chest, warming him as the mother shivered. Taza sat by the fire the rest of the night. He did not sleep, did not speak. He only watched the flames, one hand resting on the child, the other brushing sweat from Abigail's brow. In the early light, Abigail stirred. Her vision cleared. And there he was, kneeling beside her, eyes heavy with fatigue but unblinking. Her gaze met his. For the first time she did not look away. The days stretched longer, warmer. Time blurred into the hush of pine needles and smoke. They spoke no common tongue, but somehow Abigail and Taza began to speak anyway. It started with hands. One afternoon, while the child napped beside a ring of sunlit stones, Abigail pointed to herself and mouthed, "Abigail." Then, slowly, she gestured to the baby, placed her hand over her heart. "Samuel." Taza watched quietly. After a moment, he picked up a piece of river stone and began to scratch on a flat slate near the fire. He drew a symbol, a circle with arrows pointing inward. In the smaller one, broken. He placed a hand over the drawing, his fingers splayed like roots, eyes shadowed. "Family." Abigail understood. He wiped the slate and drew again, figures with feathers, then others with rifles, a slash between them. Soldiers. Death. The past. He watched in silence, her breath tight in her chest. Then he tapped his own chest and drew one last shape. A single leaf in wind. She reached for the slate, but stopped. Instead she pulled a scrap of worn cloth from her pack and began stitching the hem of his cloak, frayed from years of wear. He watched her fingers move, like they carried prayers. Taza returned that night with roots and bark, placing them carefully near the fire. Abigail ground them between stones, boiled them in a battered pot, and added a pinch of wild garlic. It was not stew, but it was warm. They ate in silence. The crackle of the fire spoke for them. That evening Abigail sat beside him, her son nestled in her arms. The boy's cheeks were flushed, breath shallow, his skin burned with fever. Abigail's hands trembled as she dipped a cloth into cool water and laid it on his brow. Her eyes filled with tears. Taza watched. Then, without a word, he stood. He saddled his horse with calm, practiced movements, slung a pouch across his back, and turned to her. He touched 2 fingers to his lips, then to the child's forehead, a silent promise. Then he rode into the woods like smoke, vanishing between the trees. Abigail waited. Hours passed. The sun fell. The baby whimpered in her arms. She whispered lullabies that broke under her breath. The wind howled. She watched the fire die low. She did not sleep. By dawn, hoofbeats stirred the air. Taza returned. His face was drawn, eyes hollow from exhaustion. Mud streaked his boots. His hands clutched a bundle of herbs wrapped in doe skin, leaves and roots with a dark red vein running down the spine. He knelt and placed the bundle before her. Steam rose as they boiled the leaves. Taza held the baby gently upright while Abigail spooned in the bitter tea, drop by trembling drop. The child sputtered, cried, drank. And then, quiet. The fever broke at dusk. Abigail collapsed beside the boy, her hands over her face, weeping into her palms. Taza stood watch all night. Later, as she prepared fresh bandages, she noticed a tear in the fabric of his shirt. She reached for it instinctively, then paused. Taza didn't flinch. She slid the cloth from his shoulder. A long, jagged scar slashed across his skin, like lightning frozen in flesh, old, healed, but angry. She touched it softly. "Who did this to you?" she whispered. He looked up at her, then at the sky. Silent. Then he pointed, slowly, upward. Abigail's breath caught. Taza shook his head. He pointed again. To the wind, the sun. All of it. The world. She understood. The world had done this. Life. Men. Violence stitched into the earth. She did not ask again. Instead, she pressed the bandage to his shoulder, careful, firm. He did not look away. When she finished, she rested her hand over the healed wound, and for a long time they simply sat, 2 souls with torn pasts, quietly sharing breath. That night the fire burned steady, not for warmth, but for belonging. The rains came with no warning. It began as a low grumble across the plains, a ripple in the gray sky above the trees. Abigail had just finished feeding the baby, now gurgling in her lap, when the first drop struck her cheek. Taza looked up, nostrils flaring. He stood slowly, eyes scanning the horizon. "Sundowney," he murmured. "Thunder's breath." Within moments, the sky tore open. Rain lashed through the forest, drenching everything. The canvas of the lodge sagged, weighted by water. Wind howled through the trees, pulling at the stakes, snapping branches like dry twigs. Abigail clutched the baby to her chest, wrapping them both in the wool blanket. The little one whimpered, frightened by the storm. Taza rushed inside, soaked and mud-streaked. Without a word, he pulled the broken support beam to his shoulder and held it up, his back bent low, shielding them with his body as the storm roared around them. Lightning cracked above. The world flashed white. The lodge began to cave. Taza let out a low shout, not of fear, but command. "Down!" he ordered, and Abigail ducked, curling around the baby. The next moments blurred. Wind, rain, Taza's arms braced above them, then silence. Only the dripping of rain on wet earth. The shelter had collapsed, but they were safe. Later, After the storm passed, Taza led Abigail and the child to higher ground. He found a small glade, ringed by sturdy trees. Then he went to work. For days he built. This time not a lodge of animal hide and sapling poles, but one of stripped cedar and pine. He shaped beams with his own hands, notching joints with flint, lashing them with sinew and bark rope. The roof he covered with bark tiles and moss. Inside he laid stones for a hearth. When it was done, Abigail stood at the threshold, her arms cradling the child. The sunlight streamed through the spaces between wood slats, catching in the golden fuzz of the baby's hair. She looked around, at the beams, the fire pit, the dried meat hanging near the back. "This is not just a home," she whispered. "It's where I was born, again." Taza didn't speak, but he met her eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, perhaps, or understanding? A shared breath. That night they sat by the fire. Abigail had used the last of the charcoal to write on a flat stone. She showed it to him. "Hope," she said, pointing to the baby. "Her name is Hope." Taza repeated it slowly, testing the shape in his mouth. His accent curled the word, made it something new. "Hope," he said again. Then he took a piece of coal and drew the letters beside hers. The lines were shaky, the O a perfect circle, but it was there. Abigail smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. In the days that followed, he taught her to fire an arrow, to strip bark for tea, to use flint to keep flame even when the rains came. She showed him how to shape letters, how to fold cloth into a cradle, how to laugh without fear. They didn't need many words. They had survival, they had fire, they had hope. The sound of hooves shattered the quiet of the meadow. Abigail straightened from the patch of wild rye she had been gathering, sweat on her brow, a bundle of stalks in her arms. Across the field, Taza paused, his hand still on the blade he used to harvest. He looked toward the ridge. Dust. Figures. Riders. Abigail's heart seized in her chest. She clutched the baby closer. Hope was slung against her hip in a cloth wrap, dozing from the warmth. Taza's posture changed. He did not move toward his bow. Instead, he reached for the child. Abigail handed Hope to him without a word. He stood between her and the approaching riders, a shadow against the sun. They came fast, 6 men, their horses frothing, eyes sharp. At the front rode the deputy, Thomas Crawley. His uniform was dust-caked, his badge dulled, but his sneer was unmistakable. Behind him were townsfolk, men she recognized, men who had watched the church burn and never lifted a hand. "Well, I'll be damned," Crowley said, pulling his horse to a halt. "Look what the savages dragged in." One of the men behind him spat, another cocked his rifle. "Miss Moore," Crowley called mockingly, "we've come to rescue you. That wild dog take you against your will, or were you always planning to shack up with a redskin?" Taza said nothing. He kept Hope close, one arm a shield across the bundle. Abigail stepped out from behind him. "I am not going anywhere," she said, voice steady despite the fear rising in her. "Lady," one of the riders said, dismounting, "he's got you brainwashed. You do not know what you're saying. You're not safe here." Another reached for her arm. "Come on now, let's not make a scene." His grip was firm, tugging. She jerked free, stumbling back. "Let go," she shouted. Taza stiffened, but still did not draw a weapon. Crowley slid from his saddle, moving in closer. "What did he do? Fill your head with savage nonsense? Did he hurt the baby? Tell us the truth, Abigail, we'll believe you." "No, you won't," she snapped. "You never did." "Excuse me?" His hand hovered near his belt, where a pistol gleamed. "I told the truth before, and no one listened, no one believed me when I screamed in the dark. Not my father, not the church, not the men who claimed to be righteous." Crowley's face darkened. She stepped forward, raising her voice so it echoed across the valley. "If any of you still believe I am a victim," she said, "then let me choose. And I choose this man, this warrior, who has never once made me feel small or dirty or afraid." The wind held the silence like a stretched drum skin. Taza stood behind her, still unmoving. Hope stirred, let out a tiny cry. "You think he's a savage?" Abigail's voice trembled now, but she kept going. "He is the only one who stayed up all night when my daughter had fever, who rode alone through the storm to save her, who built us a home with his hands and never asked for anything in return." No one spoke. Crowley's jaw ticked. Finally, the oldest of the riders leaned toward him. "This ain't right, Tom. She ain't chained. She ain't screaming. Let's go." Crowley spat at the ground. "You're making a mistake, girl." Abigail did not flinch. "Maybe, but it's mine to make." One by one, the riders turned. Crowley lingered a moment longer. "Don't bother crawling back when it goes bad. You ain't got a place anymore." "We'll make one," Abigail said quietly. And with that they rode off, hooves thundering back the way they came. Taza exhaled, his shoulders falling. He handed Hope back to her gently. Abigail pressed her cheek to her daughter's head, feeling the tremble in her own hands. Taza's palm rested lightly on her back. They stood in the quiet that followed, a family the world refused to accept, and yet still standing. The valley Taza brought them to was cradled between two hills, like a secret cupped in gentle hands. No roads reached it, only a winding deer path and the whisper of wind through tall grass. Here the sun rose over mist, and each morning brought the rustle of wild birds and the echo of a life that did not need permission to exist. Abigail stood beneath the overhang of their new shelter, arms wrapped around Hope as she nursed. The little house was nothing more than logs, clay, and thatch, but it held them safe. A small garden grew behind it, beans curling up wooden stakes, squash leaves spreading wide like protective palms. Nearby, a line of fish dried in the breeze, and a rabbit stew simmered over the coals. Taza moved with quiet efficiency. He dug irrigation ditches from the stream, built a smokehouse, laid traps in the woods. He carried Hope without hesitation, and always placed her where the sun could warm her face first thing in the morning. One day, he carved a smooth stone from the river, and etched into it, "Hope, born of fire and moonlight." When Abigail asked why those words, he answered, "Because fire is how she survived. Moonlight is how I found you." They spoke more now. His English was rough, hers limited in Comanche, but between them bloomed a language of shared glances and gestures. He taught her to dry herbs, tan hides, make arrows. She showed him how to twist string from cattails and mend seams with invisible stitches. Hope grew stronger each week, giggling at the chickens, chasing butterflies with clumsy hands. But peace was never a permanent visitor. It began with the scent, faint at first, like roasted wood far away. Taza stood at the edge of the hill, nostrils flaring. He muttered a word Abigail did not understand. "Fire?" she asked. He nodded. "South wind brings it." By nightfall, the smoke had thickened. Trees whispered of danger in the way they swayed. Taza packed a satchel with food, water, and wrapped Hope against his chest. They evacuated the animals, covered the garden with soaked hides, and dug a shallow trench around the home. Still, the flames came, flickering on the distant ridge like orange ghosts. When the fire hit, it came with a roar. Ash fell like snow. Taza saw the neighbor's shed collapse under burning branches. Through the smoke, he heard a child scream. "No," Abigail gasped. "There's no time, Taza." But he was already running. He found the child, a boy no older than 5, curled beside a stump, coughing, too afraid to move. Taza grabbed him and bolted, but a falling limb caught his shoulder, sending them both tumbling. With blood in his eyes and the boy clinging to his neck, he stumbled back through the choking dark. Abigail had not stayed still. She had built a shield of wet blankets across the front of the house, doused the walls with barrel water. When Taza collapsed near the porch, she pulled the boy away and dragged Taza's heavy frame into the cabin, slamming the door against the heat. The next hours passed in blur and heat. Abigail soaked cloths, pressed cold water to his burned skin, kept Hope and the boy tucked in the root cellar with buckets of damp earth. When the fire finally passed, the valley was scorched, but their home still stood. Taza drifted in and out of consciousness for 2 days. On the third morning, Abigail sat beside him, rewrapping the bandages with trembling fingers. "You almost died," she said, voice raw. His eyes opened slowly. "But I did not." "You saved him," she whispered. "He needed saving." She took his hand, calloused, worn, and held it against her heart. Her face was streaked with ash and tears. "I am not the preacher's daughter anymore, not in God's house, not in town, not on paper. But if you will have me, I am yours. Not by law, not by sermon, but by soul." He did not speak, only lifted her hand and kissed the scar on her palm, where a splinter from the fire had dug deep. The gesture was quiet, but final. Hope babbled from her blanket, and the boy stirred nearby. Abigail smiled through wet lashes. They were a strange family, forged not by tradition, but by fire and will. By nightfall, Taza had risen enough to stand. He limped with a branch as a cane, watching Abigail chase Hope across the singed earth. The boy, Eli, clung to her skirts. Later, Taza returned to the stone by the river. He added another name beneath Hope's: Eli, found in fire, kept by grace. No last names. Only meaning. Only belonging. Spring returned with soft rains and the hum of bees along the riverbanks. The land around their valley pulsed with new life. Buds on the cottonwoods, deer tracks in the mud, the call of birds returning to old nests. And with the season, something deeper took root among the three who had carved a home from exile. On a morning dusted with golden light, Abigail held her daughter close beneath the willow tree. "It is time," she said softly. "She needs a name that will hold both sun and shadow." Taza stood beside her, arms crossed, gaze on the sky. "Hope," he said, as if it had always been. "Hope Von Taza." The name was spoken aloud just once, carved gently into the old stone near the stream where her story had begun. Hope did not carry a surname from one bloodline. She carried two worlds in her bones: the silence of the plains, the echo of church bells now long forgotten. In the weeks that followed, Abigail transformed part of their home into something more than shelter. She opened a small tent school beside the fields. Under its canvas roof, she taught the children of Comanche and Kiowa families to read, to stitch, to tell stories with needle and ink. Taza joined her some mornings, etching symbols onto bark and bone, stories of ancestors, rivers, spirits. No child paid with coin. They paid with curiosity and were repaid in care. Hope sat among them, laughing, learning. Her world was not made of pews and shame, but earth and acceptance. One evening, as the sun slid low, the three climbed a ridge overlooking the distant valley. Far beyond the trees lay the town Abigail had once called home, a place that had judged her for her scars and cast her into shadow. She did not flinch now. Abigail placed a hand on Taza's shoulder. "I do not need to be welcomed," she said, voice steady. "I only need to be loved." A sound broke the stillness, a soft thwip, and then a vibration in the grass beside them. A single arrow had landed, its tip sunk lightly into the earth. Taza stepped forward, knelt beside it. No danger, no warning. The shaft was marked with feathers and beads, a symbol of passage, a gift. He turned to Abigail, lifting the arrow for her to see. "It means this land accepts us." Hope clapped her hands. The wind picked up. Overhead, the cloth they used as a flag, stitched with threads of deer sinew and dyed with berries, snapped against the air. And for the first time it carried no judgment, only belonging, only family. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the wind of the prairie, the sting of injustice, and the quiet power of love that defies shame, time, and bloodlines, then this is just the beginning. At Wild West Love Stories, we bring you more than tales. We bring you truths wrapped in dust and devotion, where every heartbeat could be a goodbye or a forever. Subscribe now to never miss a new story. Saddle up, ride with us through history, and remember, some love isn't written in law or scripture, but carved in courage, stitched in silence, and whispered through the wind. This is Wild West Love Stories, where bullets missed, but hearts didn't.